Hi, and welcome to Mrs. Pam Reads, where we are continuing in The Magic Circle by Katherine Neville. In our last video, we were talking, the section is labeled Blood, and we were in Galilee in the spring of AD 39. Basically, we heard about how Antipas beheaded John the Baptist, and that who is looking for it? Caligula is now looking for the platter that John's head had been placed on when presented to Herod Antipas. So he's wondering, how did Caligula learn about this platter? And that was AD 39. Now we're jumping. So this is Rome, noon, January 24, AD 41. Spirit and matter. It is no paradox, but a great truth born out of all history that human culture advances only through the clash of opposites. And that was said by J.J. Bashanoff. It is difference of opinion that makes horse races by Mark Twain. Interesting comment. Okay. Herod Agrippa struggled uphill. His breath labored, his heart pounding against his ribs, his brow drenched in sweat, and with only a single soldier of the Praetorian Guard to share his burden. He was terrified they might be recognized. After all, it had been done in broad daylight. He was even more afraid someone might guess exactly what the burden was they carried beneath this blanket. Who could imagine, thought Agrippa, that someone so light, a graceful dancer, a youth who'd actually been acclaimed a spirit or a god, would be as heavy as a sack full of stones. But those 30 knife wounds through the face, stomach, and genitalia of the late Gaius Caesar, who only 20 minutes earlier had been alive and well in the colonnade, should have convinced anyone the Emperor Caligula had been anything but a god. The flesh was still warm as they lugged his corpse up the Esquiline hill to the shelter of the Lamian Gardens. But the blood-soaked toga, already stiffened in the cold January air, adhered to the blanket. Agrippa realized that under the circumstances of the emperor's violent death, a state funeral was hardly possible. But he prayed at least they might accomplish a swift and covert burial before the maddened mobs found the body and indulged in the favorite Roman sport, desecration of the dead. Blech. This brutal assassination had taken place before Agrippa's very eyes. He'd just left the auditorium with Claudius and Caligula, where they'd been watching the Palatine Games. Caligula paused to watch some boys rehearsing the Trojan war dance to be performed for those returning after lunch. It was then that the attack came. A large group of men, a group that, to Agrippa's amazement, included the emperor's own personally chosen German and Thracian bodyguards, fell en masse upon Caligula, with spears and javelins yelling blasphemies, and while he yet continued to live and breathe, hacking him to bits. Ugh, gross. Okay, Claudius, who fell and hid behind a curtain in Hermaeum, was discovered there and whisked outside the city gates for his own protection by the Praetorian Guard. In the pandemonium that ensued, a splinter group hurled off to dispatch Caligula's wife and son, while those of the Roman Senate, who were among the conspirators, scurried to convene an emergency session, calling for a vote to bring back the Republic. It had all happened so fast, in a matter of moments, that Agrippa's head was still spinning as he puffed uphill, finally reaching the leafy obscurity of the gardens, so they could lay down their burden. He sat on a rock and mopped his brow as the guard began to dig. It was, in fact, mere chance that found Agrippa in Rome on this fateful day. 2 years ago, Herod Antipas and his wife, Agrippa's sister, Herodias, had been banished by Caligula to Lugdunum in southern Gaul for demanding too many favors. Now his uncle Antipas was dead and Herodias with him, and Agrippa found himself in control of a domain that, though far from united, approached the size of that his grandfather Herod the Great had once possessed, and with it he'd inherited most of the headaches. Not least among these was trying to manage the many conflicts between his Roman patrons and his subjects, the zealously religious Jews. The most recent stir, the one that brought Agrippa here to Rome only this week, was the Emperor Caligula's recent decision to teach the Jews a lesson for all the disturbances they'd caused their Roman overlords. Caligula planned to do this by setting up a colossal stone statue of himself as Gaius the god within the very grounds of the Jerusalem temple. The statue was rumored to be already en route by ship to the port of Joppa. Agrippa would have full-blown riots on his hands the moment such an effigy disembarked on Jewish soil. And so he hastened here to Rome at once to see whether he might change the course of events already set in motion. After all, had Agrippa not grown up along Caligula's uncle Claudius within the very bosom of the imperial family? And he'd also remained close enough to Caligula all these years to have reaped the reward of golden chains and jewels, not to mention a kingdom of his own. He therefore had cause to hope that, together with Claudius, he might convince the young emperor to see reason in the matter. But upon his arrival at Rome, Agrippa had hardly prepared for the man he was to meet in the person of the emperor. The very first night, he was fast asleep in the palace when, well past midnight, he was aroused by the palace guards. They'd forced him to dress and then marched him double-step to the palace auditorium. There he found a group of prominent senators and statesmen, as well as the emperor's uncle, Claudius, who'd likewise been brought from the safety of their homes in the dead of night. They were trembling in fear as the soldiers lit the wicks of oil lamps on the stage up front. Claudius was about to speak when, with great fanfare of flutes and cymbals, the emperor leapt on stage dressed as Venus in a short silk toga and a wig of long blonde hair. He sang a lovely song of his own composition, performed a dance, and vanished. It's been like this ever since his sister Drusilla death, Claudius told Agrippa when they'd quitted the chamber. He sleeps barely 3 hours a night, roaming the palace and howling at the sky, inviting the moon goddess into his bed to take his sister's place in his arms. Drusilla died, you'll recall, on the 10th of June, not 3 years ago. He was inconsolable, sleeping next to her corpse for days. He wouldn't be removed from her side. Then he raced off alone by chariot through the Campania, took the ship to Syracuse, and vanished for a month. He didn't shave or cut his hair. Upon his return, he looked and behaved like a wild man. Things only went downhill from there. Good grief, said Agrippa. What could be worse than what you've just told? Plenty, said Claudius. During Drusilla's official mourning period, he made it a capital offense to laugh, bathe, or dine with one's family. and then required all state oaths to be sworn to her divinity. He accused both of his other sisters of treason, exiled them to the Pontine Islands, then sold off their houses and jewelry and slaves to raise cash. Then he built a stable of ivory tusks and jewels for his racehorse Insidious. He often throws lavish dinner parties where Insidious, dining on golden barley, is guest of honor. He has seized and liquidated people's property on the merest pretext, and has opened a brothel in the west wing of the imperial palace. I myself have often seen him run barefoot or even roll about on the floor in those piles of gold coins he hoards. A year ago, he mounted a military expedition through Gaul and Germania with the expressed intent of conquering Britannia. But after a long, hard winter and a 6-month march, when the legions reached the Channel at last, Gaius only had them collect thousands of seashells and then headed back to Rome. But Caligula had planned that mission ever since Tiberius died and he first became emperor, cried Agrippa. Why did he abandon it, and in such bizarre fashion? Has he gone mad? Doomed, rather, and he knows it, Claudius replied gravely. Of late, the omens have not been good. On the Ides of March, the capital at Capua was struck by lightning. Then, when Gaius was sacrificing a flamingo, he was splashed by its blood. Sulla, the astrologer, cast his horoscope this past August for his birthday and said he must prepare to die soon. That same evening, Mnestor danced the tragedy that was performed on the very night Alexander's father, Philip of Macedon, was assassinated. You can't believe such things really carry weight, asked Agrippa, at the same time recalling from his youth just how obsessed the imperial family has always been, like most Romans, by omens read in the entrails of birds and beasts, all with all forms of prophecy. Did they not keep the ancient books of the Sibylline oracles encased in gold? Why does it matter what I believe? Claudius replied. You don't understand. If my nephew dies just now, with all we've learned, I may have to invade Britannia myself. And that's where we stop for a new section and a new year. All right. Well, that's all very interesting and a little bit gross, but it is what's written in the story, and it is a historical fiction. So, you know, the facts, the fiction, if you're curious, check the information. All right, you guys, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.